looking on the issue of Palestine going back into the 19th century and finding out what Palestine really is from a biblical perspective. In the 19th century, the Russian persecution, hopes and promises, the Balfour Declaration achieved one of the main aims of the Zionists. The return of the Jews to Palestine had been recognized as a legitimate aspiration for world Jewry. But one imponderable condition remained. The Balfour Declaration, although approved by the United States, France, and Italy, had been granted by Britain alone, and would depend on Britain as to how it would be implemented. The Jews did not become masters of their own destiny in Palestine on 2nd November 1917. That destiny still depended upon British rules and interpretations. So we move on down to, at its meeting on January 19th, the Middle East Committee decided to send out to Palestine a Zionist commission led by Weizmann to help in establishing friendly relations between the Jews on the one hand and the Arabs and the other non-Jewish committees on the other. Not only did the Zionist Commission carry out its work in respect of future Jewish developments in Palestine, Weizmann also made a strenuous effort to reach agreement with Emir Faisal, a king of King Hussein and commander of the Arab forces, which were about to declare themselves at war with the Turks. 1917. On October 30th, the Turks surrendered to the Allies. Palestine was firmly under British military control, but less than a year after the issue of the Balfour Declaration. So the Weizmann-Faisal Agreement. Meeting in London in December 1918, Weizmann and Faisal continued to try to find some common ground between the Zionist and Arab positions. This Weizmann-Faisal Agreement, as it came to be known, was completed on 3rd January 1919. Article 4 declared that all necessary measures should be taken to encourage and stimulate immigration of Jews into Palestine on a large scale and as quickly as possible to settle Jewish immigrants upon the land through closer settlement and intensive cultivation of the soil. In taking such measures, the agreement went on, the Arab peasant and tenant farmers shall be protected in their rights and shall be assisted in forwarding their economic development. Weizmann and Faisal agreed that the boundary between Arab state and Palestine would be determined by a commission agreed upon by them both. In Palestine, the Muslim holy places would be under Muslim control. No law would be made to interfere in any way with the free exercise of religion. In addition, the Zionist organization would use its best efforts to assist the Arab state in providing the means for developing the natural resources and economic possibilities thereof. It was reported by Weizmann that the Zionist organization did not want an autonomous Jewish government, but merely to establish in Palestine, under a mandatory power, an administration not necessarily Jewish, which would render it possible to send into Palestine 70,000 to 80,000 Jews annually. The organization would require to have permission at the same time to build Jewish schools where Hebrew would be taught and to develop institutions of every kind. Thus it would build up gradually a nationality. How did the Arab delegation at Paris react to these submissions? 3 weeks earlier, on February 6th, the head of the Arab delegation, the Emir Faisal himself, had already told the Supreme Council that because of Palestine's universal character, he accepted that it should be left on one side for the consideration of all countries interested. On March 1st, he expressed himself clearly and firmly in favor of the Zionist position. In a long letter to one of the many American Zionist leaders, Felix Frankfurter, we Arabs, Faisal wrote, especially the educated among us, look with deepest sympathy on the Zionist movement. Faisal's letter continued, our deputation here in Paris is fully acquainted with the proposals submitted yesterday by the Zionist organization to the peace conference, and we regard them as moderate and proper. We will do our best, insofar as we are concerned, to help them through. We will wish the Jews a most hearty welcome home. With the chiefs of your movement, especially with Dr. Weizmann, we have had and continue to have the closest relations. We have been a great helper of our cause, and I hope the Arabs may soon be in a position to make the Jews some return for their kindness. We are working together for a reformed and revived Near East, and our two movements complete one another. The Jewish movement is national and not imperialistic. Our movement is national and not imperialistic as well, and there is room for Syria for us both. In Syria for us both. Indeed, I think that neither can be a real success without the other. Notice they use the word Syria. Neither Faisal's letter to Frankfurter nor the early agreement between Weizmann and Faisal could provide a guarantee of future Jewish-Arab amity. Indeed, in a handwritten note which he added to the agreement itself, Faisal had stressed that he would only carry out what is written in this agreement on one condition, that the Arabs obtain their independence in Syria. By July 1920, the French had deposed Faisal from the throne of Assyria. 2 years later, however, with British support, Faisal did become king of an Arab state, Iraq, which gained complete independence in 1932. National idea of a commanding character, 1919 to 1921. So we go through this history, and we find it did a complete turnabout as the years go by. For 30 years, beginning in 1918, the status of the Jews already in Palestine and the future of those who wished to go there was dependent upon British policy. Although a Jewish national home had come into existence in 1918, or was at least promised, the Jews themselves had to rely upon British goodwill and British-controlled legislation to secure or strengthen their legal and physical position there. There was certainly no unanimity of pro-Zionist feeling among the British policy makers during 1919 and 1920. Sometimes the attitude was much more than that of actual hostility. On July 2, 1919, the Syrian General Congress, meeting in Damascus, challenged the Emir Faisal's acceptance of Zionism and, in a strongly worded memorandum, demanded the union of Palestine with Syria and an immediate end to all Jewish immigration. The British government, however, felt itself firmly committed to a pro-Zionist policy. On June 19th, General Clayton had telegraphed to the Foreign Office from Cairo for approval of a Palestinian ordinance to reopen land purchase under official control. Balfour replied that land purchase could indeed be continued, provided that, as far as possible, preferential treatment is given to Zionist interests. The anti-Zionist group in Britain spanned both political parties. On August 1919, an American Commission of Inquiry, known as the King-Crane Commission, criticized Zionist ambitions and recommended what it called serious modification of the extreme Zionist program for Palestine of unlimited immigration of Jews, looking finally to make Palestine distinctly a Jewish state. During 1919, anti-Semitism became more widespread. It was not confined to Russians or Eastern Europeans anymore. On October 16th, a public event took place in a Munich beer cellar, a speech by Adolf Hitler, then aged 30. His denunciations of the Jews held his audience spellbound for half an hour. Evidence of the Jewish role in Bolshevik Russia created throughout 1919 and 1920 a hostile attitude towards the Jews. By the end of 1919, more than 100,000 Jews had been murdered in the Ukraine and Poland. Wow. Writing in the Illustrated Sunday Herald on February 8, 1920, another non-Jew, the British Secretary of State for War, Winston Churchill, encapsulated the main contemporary attitudes towards both Zionism and the Jews. Some people like Jews and some do not, he wrote, but no thoughtful man can doubt the fact that they are beyond all doubt the most formidable and the most remarkable race which has ever appeared in the world. Churchill then appealed to world Jewry to abandon Bolshevism and to turn instead to Zionism. Zionism, Churchill believed, offered to the Jews a national idea of a commanding character. Palestine would provide the Jewish race all over the world with, as he put it, a home and a center of national life. The Prime Minister remained a staunch supporter of the Jewish people. The year 1920 was a fateful one for the Jews, for it saw not only Lloyd George's determination to accept the Palestine mandate for Britain, but also in Germany the evolution of Adolf Hitler's crude anti-Semitic views from the obscurity of individual prejudice to the publicity of the popular mob. In Palestine, Haj Amin el-Husseini, a member of one of the leading Arab families, had been sentenced to 10 years imprisonment for incitement to violence. He fled across Jordan. Only 6 months later, on 8 May 1921, was appointed Mufti of Jerusalem and later president of the newly created Supreme Muslim Council. This made him effective head of the Muslim community in Palestine. Henceforth, he was to be a leading instigator of a sequence of protests, of riots, and after 1936, of murder against Jews, against British soldiers and civilians, and against several hundred moderate Arabs who opposed his extreme activities. In pursuance of his aim to see a Jewish national home established in Palestine, Lloyd George entrusted Winston Churchill, who became colonial secretary in January 1920, to supervise the details of the emergence of the formal League of Nations mandate. So Faisal agrees to abandon all claims of his father to Palestine. Among the first letter which Churchill received in his new cabinet post was one from T.E. Lawrence, who on 17 January 1921 reported on his discussions with the Emir Faisal, who had, Lawrence wrote, agreed to abandon all the claims of his father to Palestine. In return, Faisal wanted both Mesopotamia and Transjordan to become Arab states. This was accomplished within 2 years, when Faisal himself became ruler of Mesopotamia and his brother Abdullah ruler of Transjordan. Mesopotamia, as Iraq, became independent in 1932, Transjordan in 1946. As part of Britain's policy towards Transjordan, all the Jewish national home provisions of the Palestine Mandate were specifically excluded from the whole of Transjordan. Winston Churchill makes his case for a Jewish national home in Palestine. Churchill visited Palestine in March 1921, where he was greeted by a petition from the Haifa Congress of Palestinian Arabs, dated March 14, 1921. It read, "We refuse the Jewish immigration to Palestine. 2. We energetically protest against the Balfour Declaration to the effect that our country should be made the Jewish national home." In his reply, Churchill stated the case for the Zionists in a powerful manner. "It is manifestly right," he told the Palestinian Arabs on March 28, "manifestly right that the Jews, who are scattered all over the world, should have a national center and a national home where some of them may be reunited. And where else could that be but in the land of Palestine, with which for more than 3,000 years they had been intimately and profoundly associated. We think it would be good for the world, good for Jews, and good for the British Empire." The Arab protest continued, and the violence that followed Churchill's visit was severe. Arab violence in Jaffa on May 1st led to the British High Commissioner in Palestine, Sir Herbert Samuel, ordering an immediate temporary suspension of Jewish immigration. 10 days later, the senior naval officer in the Eastern Mediterranean, Captain Seymour, sent to the Admiralty his report on the riots, in which he wrote, "Further immigration of foreign Jews into Palestine has been prohibited as a temporary measure, and this has given satisfaction to the Arabs." The suspension of immigration made on the authority of Sir Herbert Samuel did not entirely impress the Colonial Office, and a telegram was drafted for Churchill by one of his senior advisers, Major Young, which was dispatched to Samuel on 14 May 1921. "The present agitation," the telegram read, "is doubtless engineered in the hope of frightening us out of our Zionist policy. We must firmly maintain law and order and make concessions on their merits and not under duress." Has this changed? No. Although the total prohibition of Jewish immigration, which the Arabs continued to demand, was never acceptable to Churchill, the idea of some limit to Jewish immigration was discussed between Samuel and the Colonial Office, and it was decided to set up a limit based on what was described by Samuel as the economic absorptive capacity of Palestine. More politics. This idea of some limit took rabid shape, and within 2 years it had become government policy, to the dismay of the Zionist leaders, who saw it as an erosion of what they believed was the principle of freedom and of immigration implied in the national home phraseology of the Balfour Declaration. So much for that. For good or ill, the future of Zionism was not linked to British policy and British prejudice, but it was still up to the Zionists to take the initiative if their numbers were to grow and their efforts to flourish. On June 4th, Arthur Ruppin wrote in his diary, "It is absolutely clear to me that Zionism will perish altogether if we do not soon make a start developing Palestine agriculturally." So, the Palestine Mandate secured, 1921 to 1922. June 22, Churchill explained the British position on Zionism to the Dominion Prime Ministers at a meeting of the Imperial Cabinet. Among these present were the New Zealand Prime Minister William Massey and the Canadian Prime Minister Arthur Meighen. "The Zionist ideal," Churchill told them, "is a very great ideal, and I confess for myself it is one that claims my keen personal sympathy. But the Balfour Declaration," he added, "was more than an ideal. It was an obligation also, made in wartime, to enlist the aid of Jews all over the world, and Britain must be very careful and punctilious he explained, to discharge our obligation.